Hello my sweet friends, welcome back. Today we are going to be talking about my top 23 favorite books from 2023. It has been such a fun reading year. I've read so many amazing books, also some not so amazing books, and honestly a lot of in-between books. But obviously today I'm going to be talking about the absolute favorites that I've had. I am filming this video a little bit early, even though you guys aren't seeing it till a little bit later in the month. But at this point I've read about 190 books. So I feel like my top 23 are obviously absolute favorites. In saying that, I have managed to break those 23 down into 3 categories, because when I was writing my list I was like, some of these are top tier perfection to me, and some of them are really great books, but they're not quite as high as some of those other books. And I was like, how can I distinguish, how I feel about all of these different books? So I've broken down the 23 books into 3 categories, almost like a gold, silver, bronze situation. But to make it a little bit more interesting, of course I had to name the categories after Taylor Swift songs, because I feel like it just adequately communicates how I feel about these categories. So our bronze third place category is called Paper Rings. Also, all of these are from the Lover album, because obviously these are books that I love. So of course I'm using the Lover album. Also, the Lover album may or may not be my favorite album, so of course I had to go with that one. But third place, the bronze category, is called Paper Rings. The silver category and our second highest category is called Lover. And our gold first place category is called Daylight. And I'll explain those a little bit more as we go into them. Obviously I'm going to try and keep these reviews as short and sweet as I can, because I don't want this video to be too long. So let's just jump straight into it. I have also tried to rank these as much as possible. So even within the categories, I'll start with my least favorite and work towards my favorite in those categories. However, obviously all of these books I absolutely adore. Not all of them are 5 stars, but these are my top favorite books of the year. So obviously I recommend all of them, and I want you all to read every single one of them. Starting with our Paper Rings category, they're not my ride or dies, but I do just really adore them. And the lyrics that I paired with these books are, I want to drive away with you, I want your complications too, I want your dreary Mondays. Because it's oh my gosh, I loved you so much, but you have your complications. Maybe you're not absolutely perfect, but you are great. Starting off, we have Heartbreak House Share by Emily Merrill. This is a romance meets general fiction, I would say. It's about a girl who goes through a breakup and she just wants to kind of reinvent herself and just really make the most of her 20s. So she makes a bit of a bucket list called the 20s list, and it's just a bunch of things that she really wants to do in her 20s. She makes a lot of new friends. She just has a lot of realizations about what being in your 20s even means, and how everyone's on their own journey. And I just feel it was very refreshing, very insightful, and just fun, but still with depth. So absolutely love this one, and I don't hear enough people talking about this. Then we have Marriage for One by Ella Mays. I cannot believe it took me so long to pick up this book, because I had so much fun with it. I didn't expect to love this as much as I did, but this is a marriage of convenience rom-com type of book about a cafe owner and a lawyer, and for the cafe owner to be able to get her inheritance, she has to get married. And so the lawyer, Jack, is well, why don't you marry me? And so they do get married, and it's a bit of a slow burn, but not too slow. But it's kind of one of those things where you can genuinely see them start to care for each other over the course of the story. And it was just so beautiful. There's so many really sweet moments in this, and obviously Jack is just a bit of a grumpy guy. He is a bit standoffish, not super emotional, and over time he just becomes so soft and so caring and sweet. And it is a longer book for a romance, but I flew through it. Then we have Things We Left Behind. I know a lot of people weren't obsessed with this, but I loved it. I annotated the heck out of this as well. I thought it was really good. I think it's my favorite in the series. I actually think the first book is my least favorite in the series, which is very uncommon, I think. I think most people liked the first one the most. I just thought this book was full of a lot of really sweet moments. It definitely wasn't my favorite book I've ever read, and it still has some things that I was I don't know if I'm obsessed with that, but I did love a lot of it. This one follows Sloane and Lucian, and I think I also love this one so much because Sloane is a librarian, and I feel just a lot of Sloane's character, I was I really relate to you. She's a bit more quiet and a little bit awkward, but super sweet. And sometimes she tries to be really confident, stand up for herself, and doesn't always do it the best way. And sometimes she can make a bit of a fool of herself, but I really relate to that. So I thoroughly enjoyed this book. And this is another one that was really long, but I just flew through it. Next up, we have this tome of a book, and this is Keeping 13 by Chloe Walsh. I did not expect to include this in my favorite books of the year, but this book specifically I really liked, even more so than Binding 13. I'm still yet to continue the series, and I definitely will hopefully in the new year. The relationship that Johnny and Shannon have is so, I don't know, just like the epitome of a first love. And like, yes, they are very young, but it was really beautiful to watch. And I also just like love Johnny's mum so much. Like, she is so sweet. Like, there are some really painful and heartbreaking moments in this book, but there are also some really beautiful moments in this book. And I definitely think this is a series that is not for everyone, and I wouldn't recommend it to just anyone. But obviously this is a favorite series for a lot of people. So I think if it hits, it hits. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. Then I have Tiny Pretty Things. I feel like I don't talk about this too much, but I think about this book all the time. This one wasn't a 5-star book for me, but it is one of those books that has just stuck with me. This is about a prestigious ballet school, and we're following, I think, 3 POVs of 3 different girls who are going to this ballet school. And they all have their issues, I guess you could say, because these girls go to this ballet school and they're all competing for the same parts and the same solos and whatever else it might be. They are really competitive and they try and sabotage each other. Obviously, if this was happening in real life, it would be awful, but like in a book, it's just like fascinating. It's like you just can't take your eyes off it because it's so bad, if that makes sense. Like, you're like, how are these teenage girls this awful to each other? But also, I can't stop reading. And then the last book that I have in the paper rings category is Some Kind of Perfect by Krista and Becca Ritchie. This is the final book in the Addicted/Calloway Sisters series. This is the only book out of that series that I read this year. And I will say the only reason this book isn't like in one of the higher categories in this video is because this is the epilogue novel, so we don't get a super strong plot or a lot of crazy character development in this book. It's more so just like seeing where the characters are at a later point in life, like seeing them become parents and seeing what their jobs look like, and kind of just be happy and be peaceful and not go through such awful things, because the characters go through a lot in this series. So it's kind of just like, this book is where you get to just see them be happy for the most part. And yes, they go through some challenges in this book, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's the same as like the previous books in the series, but I just love this series so much. I definitely want to do a reread at some point. I feel so attached to the characters. I started this series in 2021 and obviously finished it this year, so I kind of dispersed it and spread it out over the past couple of years. It is a 10-book series, so it is long and the books are long, but it's so worth it because the character development that you see in this series and the attachment that you feel for the characters is unlike any other, in my opinion. So I do adore this series, I do adore these characters, but yeah, it's not like my favorite book in the whole world and not my favorite book in the series, but still so good. The next category is called the lover category, and obviously that means I adore these books. I love them so much, and these are like almost ride or die, not quite. Maybe there's just like one element that I didn't like absolutely love about these. There are definitely quite a few 5 stars in this pile, as well as some 4.5s, so not quite like 6-star reads for me, but so good. And the lyrics that I have for this category are, ladies and gentlemen, will you please stand with every guitar string scar on my hand? I take this magnetic force of a book to be my lover. The first book in our lover category is The Naturals. I honestly just mean this whole series. I think the first book is actually my least favorite out of the series, because I feel like as the series progresses, you really get to know the characters a lot more and become more attached. But I just think this series is so much fun. If you don't know, this is a YA crime thriller series. It's about a group of teenagers who get scouted by the FBI to become a part of this like special department where they work on cold cases because they have some sort of skill that the FBI recognizes as being very valuable. And so we're following our main character, Cassie, who is really good at reading people. She can just kind of like sit down with someone and read their facial expressions and their body language extremely well. These are those books that you just absolutely binge. They go so fast. I feel like it's hard to find thrillers that you feel attached to, and this series did that so well. I think being like a series, because you get to see the characters over multiple books, and over all of the books you kind of get their backstories and like why they are the way that they are and maybe why they ended up where they are. It makes you just feel so much deeper for our characters. I feel like I just never feel attached to characters in thrillers. So I absolutely adore this series. If you're just looking for something to get you out of a reading slump, if you're just looking for something quick but still has depth but is also thrilling, I would recommend The Naturals. I think my favorites from the series are probably the second book and the fourth book. Then we have When in Rome by Sarah Adams. I did not go into this book expecting to love it as much as I did. I had only read one book by Sarah Adams Adams previously to this, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun, but it wasn't like outstanding to me. And then I started this book and I was like, this is just perfect to me. Like, it's the perfect rom-com. It has a great romance, but it's also genuinely funny. I was giggling, I was laughing, but also like swooning over the characters, and I was so shocked because it's just like a little like 300-page book, and I was obsessed. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars and I still stand by that. I do think that sometimes you just like read books at the perfect time and they just like hit perfectly, and I think this is one of those books, but I can't recommend it enough. It's about a famous singer who just needs to get away from everything, so she goes to Rome, Kentucky, like a small town, and her car breaks down right in front of this guy's house, and he kind of like, you know, tries to help her, and that's kind of their meet cute, and it goes from there. It's just so much fun. He's a bit grumpy and standoffish, and yeah, I just love this so much. Next up we have Powerless by Elsie Silver. This is my favorite book in the Chestnut Spring series. It's the 3rd book, and it is Jasper and Sloane's book. Jasper was like unofficially adopted into the Eaton family. He had a really rough upbringing, and the Eaton family just really took him in, and so he's not like an official brother, but he definitely feels like family, and he goes to all the family dinners and things like that, and he is also a hockey player. And Sloane is one of the Eaton cousins. So Sloane and Jasper have known each other for a really, really long time, since they were kids, so I guess it is a bit of a childhood friends to lovers. And Sloane is basically about to commit to someone else, and that is when Jasper is just like, absolutely not, like, I'm so obsessed with you, I cannot let you do that. Jasper is like the quiet boy. He is very reserved. He doesn't really let anyone in except for Sloane, and that just is my kryptonite in a romance book. I love that sort of thing. Next up we have Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This was my first ever Brandon Sanderson book, actually still currently to this day the only one I have read. Hopefully I'll read more next year. I really, really want to. But I loved this. I thought the magic system was so unique. The story kept me engaged the whole time. It was funny, which I wasn't expecting. I think I thought Brandon Sanderson is just like this really great fantasy writer, and he's just going to be so good at writing, and it's just going to be really like intense and crazy, and like it was really good, and the action scenes were great, and the magic system was great, and the complexities and the politics, it was all great, but it was also just funny, and the characters were charismatic, and I don't know why I wasn't expecting that. But if you are intimidated by Brandon Sanderson, this is your sign to definitely pick up one of his books. Yes, they are definitely long, but I don't feel like this one felt super long to me. A lot of people either say to start with Warbreaker or The Final Empire, which is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy, and obviously I started with this one and I loved it. This is a standalone, and that's why I started with this one, and I definitely like recommend it, but also I know a lot of people say start with Mistborn, so do what you will. I will definitely be reading Mistborn next year. Then we have probably the most recent addition to this list, because this is a book that I read in November, and that is Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. But this book follows a girl who was raised in a magical library, and then something happens where she kind of gets taken out of that environment, and it's a bit of a mystery situation. Like, there's something happened and she wants to figure out why it happened, how it happened, who did it, and so she goes on a bit of a journey trying to do that, and a lot of people are kind of like out to get her. And there's also a romance in this book, which is so good. I really loved that. And I would say like the 2 main settings in this book are like these magical libraries and these old manors, which just give all the vibes. And there's also this like other side character who is just so interesting, and I really, really liked him. But overall, I just had such a great time reading this. I rated this 4.5, and I think it could have been even a 5-star if I had just like read it at the right time. I read it when I was feeling a little bit slumpy, so it took me a while to get through, but I think if I'd read it when I wasn't feeling slumpy, it could have been 5 stars. So hopefully I'll reread it at some other point, and maybe I'll change my mind and even bump it up. Then we have Renegades by Marissa Meyer. I feel like I've talked a lot about this book in the last few months, but this was just like the epitome of fun. This is YA sci-fi. It follows a bunch of superheroes. Some people in this world have powers, some people don't, and if you do have powers, you can join the Renegades, which is like this government situation that works to protect the city. But there are also these like rebel gangs who don't like the Renegades, but they are full of people who also have powers, but yeah, don't want to like conform to this government situation. So we have like the Renegades, then we have the rebel gangs, and we have one character who moves from the rebel gang into the Renegades undercover as like a bit of a spy. And we have 2 POVs in this story. We're following a main character from the Renegades, and we're following a main character from one of the rebel gangs. And there's a lot of like secret identities going on in this book, a lot of secrets in general, and it's just so much fun. I loved this trilogy. Again, these look chunky, but they fly by so fast. It just felt like an action movie. And lastly in this category, we have Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I love this book so much. This almost made it into the like top tier, but I wanted to keep the top tier at 10 books. This is a cozy fantasy, which means it doesn't really have high stakes. I know it's not for everyone. I feel like I've seen a lot of people read this and be like, I'm just bored. And I'm like, I get it. I like see. But for me, I was just like obsessed with the world, obsessed with the characters. I thought it was so much fun. There's also like a little bit of a romance in this book. Very like little romance, but it's just like fun to see that as well. It's a bit of like a academic rivals to lovers situation. Our main character is a little bit socially awkward, which makes her quite charming in my opinion. And our main character is Emily Wilde, and she is in the midst of writing an encyclopedia of fairies. So she has gone to this new land that she hasn't been to before to write like the last little chapter of this encyclopedia and to study the fairies of this land. I love this book so much. I also want to reread this one really soon, and the second book in this series comes out in January, I think, and I'm just so excited because this was just perfect to me. I loved it. And then for our final category, our top tier gold category, I've called it Daylight. And the lyrics that I assigned to this category are, I don't want to look at anything else now that I saw you. I don't want to think about anything else now that I thought of you. Like, it's just the epitome of like, now that I've seen these books, now that I've read these books, I can't get them out of my head. I'm so obsessed with them. I'm infatuated by them. They are my ride or die. I think they are as close to perfect as you can get in a book. And I will not hear any criticism on these, because although not everyone loves them as much as I do, I literally don't care because I'm obsessed. So these are my Daylight books. All of these are 5-star books. They didn't all start as 5 stars, but maybe I rated them like 4.5 and now I've bumped them up to 5 stars in my head because I haven't been able to stop thinking about them. And there is 10 in this category. So these are like my top 10 books of the year. And I've tried to rank these as much as possible. So the last few books that I mentioned are like my absolute favorites. In 10th place, we have Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I adore Abby Jimenez. I read her books for the first time in 2021 and fell in love. They are just the perfect rom-coms to me because they also have depth, and I think that's just like my perfect combination. This one especially stuck out to me because we have the, well, in my opinion, just fantastic anxiety rep. Our male main character in this book has anxiety, and I have personally never read a book that represented my anxiety as well as this book did. It felt like Jacob's POV and like his thoughts were literally like my thoughts written down. So I think just because I had such a huge like attachment to this book and felt so much of myself in this book purely because of Jacob, honestly, I just like can't not have it as one of my favorite books. Because Brie, our female main character in this book, also just like loved Jacob so well, even with his anxiety, and kind of catered and adapted her behavior to be able to make him feel comfortable and him feel secure. And that was just so beautiful to see. And I really, really loved it. So the perfect rom-com in my opinion. Everyone needs to read it. There are also letters and like notes in that book, and I love letters and notes. Then we have Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This was so freaking good. So much fun. I just want everyone to read this. I think this is also the perfect, like, oh, I haven't really read any fantasy or much fantasy, but I want to read something. Like, this is great. It is the first book in what will be a trilogy, but the first book is the only one out right now. It came out this year, and I'm just so shocked that an 18-year-old could write this book. Like, absolutely shocked. Here's the thing with this book. It is not the most revolutionary, craziest, most unique storyline that I've ever seen. It's not the most amazing world building or magic system that I've ever seen, but it was just fun. And yes, I've seen these tropes and these plot twists and these character types before, but it just did them so well. So I understand what people say when they're like, oh, it wasn't anything special, but like to me, it took these things that have been done before, but just did them so well. And the romance was so good. I literally cannot believe that this is her debut novel. I was kicking my feet. I was giggling. It was just such a fantastic reading experience. I want everyone to read this, and I cannot wait to read the next book in the series. Next we have House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J Maas. This is the first book in the Crescent City series. I read Crescent City for the first time in January this year, and I really, really loved it. Also, I forgot to mention, I didn't include rereads in this list. Otherwise, I could have mentioned ACOTAR, Throne of Glass, Magnolia Parks, a lot of other books, but I've decided not to include rereads. But this is the only Sarah J Maas series that I read for the first time this year, and I think the first book out of the two was my favorite. I just had a lot of fun with this. I think it is very different and quite unique for Sarah J Maas specifically because it is more of that like urban fantasy, modern kind of vibe. I do really recommend reading ACOTAR, then Throne of Glass, then Crescent City though. If you're thinking about starting the Sarah J Maas megaverse, I would personally recommend doing it in that order. Next up we have my only like general fiction slash literary fiction book in this entire list, and that is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This was such a phenomenal read, very unique, very different from anything else I've read. We follow two characters as they go through many years of their lives, I think about 20 years, and it just felt like these characters were so real. I felt very attached to them, even though they are a little bit unlikable at times, a little bit flawed, but I think that's what made them feel so real to me. I actually quite like a flawed and unlikable character depending on the situation. I don't think like a flawed character makes them unenjoyable to me, and I think in this situation specifically, these characters just felt quite real. And yes, I was frustrated with them at times, but overall I could understand where they were coming from and I could see things from their point of view. And I think a lot of people in real life would have behaved as they did if they were in the exact same situation. It's very easy to be like, oh, they're so frustrating, they're making all these mistakes, when you're like reading it in a book and you're not in the situation. But I adored Sam and Sadie, and there was this one chapter in this book that was just so unique to me and just full of little Easter eggs and full of referencing all of these things that had been briefly mentioned much earlier in the book and just like throughout the book, and then, you know, this chapter just mentioned so many of those things, and it was one of those things where it's like you only notice them if you've really been paying attention, and it felt like a Taylor Swift situation and I loved it. So I cannot recommend this book enough. I would recommend it to literally everyone and anyone. Obviously it's not for everyone, but it just feels like out of all of the books that I have on this list, this is probably one of those books that I could see the most people really enjoying. I'm going to talk about the next two books together because they kind of relate to each other, and that is Clockwork Princess and Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. These books are part of different series by Cassandra Clare, but part of the same like universe. They take place in the same universe, except this book follows one set of characters and this series follows these characters' children. It's a little bit confusing to explain, but when you read it, it's not complicated at all, in my opinion. I would mention each of these series as a whole, but I just chose my favorite book from each series to mention in this list. But this is the third book in the Infernal Devices, and this is the first book in The Last Hours. The Last Hours was really hard to choose like which is my favorite book, because I think they all sit pretty much the same to me in terms of like which one's my favorite. Like they all kind of feel the same, whereas this one is like the third book is easily my favorite. I adore The Shadowhunters World by Cassandra Clare, but these two series specifically just hit me so hard, and I had so much fun reading them. I love these characters so much. I already cannot wait to reread these series in this world. I read all of the Infernal Devices in January, and they have stuck with me. I think about these characters and these characters constantly, but I feel like Cassandra Clare just does romance so well, world building so well. She creates the vibe just so well. I don't know how she does it, and like she writes so many different characters, but they don't ever really feel the same to me. She does angst so well. They're all young adult, and I just really wish I'd read these series when I was younger, because I would have been, actually maybe I don't, because I would have been insufferable. I think I would have been utterly obsessed, but I love Cassie Clare. In fourth place we have Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I adore this book. I read this when I filmed my like booktubers choose what I read, and Sarah recommended this, and I'm so glad that she did. I don't even have words for how much I love this book. Like it was actually perfect to me, and it's so interesting because a lot of people don't love this book. They think it's quite slow, or they just were like, oh, it was just like meh. But to me, this is my new Roman Empire. Like I think about Iris and Kit so often. I annotated this book as I read it, and I'm so glad that oh my gosh, like I just am like looking through the quotes even now, and I'm just like, I'm screaming on the inside. They're just, I need to do a reread immediately. And when the second book comes out, prepare to be sick of me. Prepare to be sick of me. To me, this is very pure, very wholesome, kind of like an old-fashioned, timeless kind of love story. It's about characters who are writing letters to each other on magical typewriters, and there's this war going on in the background. They're both journalists, a bit of a secret identity situation. They're like falling in love with each other through these letters. Like, you like, stop. So good. In third place we have The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. This is definitely my favorite book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy. I would say it goes Ballad of Never After, Curse for True Love, and then Once Upon a Broken Heart. Like this just felt so ethereal and magical and majestic and exquisite to me. Like it felt like I was living in a fairy tale. It felt like I fell down the rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland and I was just experiencing it all firsthand. It felt like I was Evangeline, and I never feel like I am the main character. Like I know some people say when they read a book, they imagine themselves as the main character. I never do that. But this one I would say is the closest I felt to being the main character, which maybe that's why it felt so special to me. The romance in this book as well was just spectacular, and like the angst and like the forbiddenness of it, I guess. But even just like the world building and the side characters, nothing really made sense in the best way possible. Like it felt like, you know, Alice in Wonderland, where there's all of these rules in this world that you don't understand as an outsider, but you're just kind of going along with it because you're like, okay, like, I guess. I just like can't even explain my love for this book and this series. And also the UK covers really kill it. Like, even just this, you're kidding, like this isn't even a special edition or something, and it looks like that. Okay, pop off. Obsessed. I love it so much. My second favorite book of the year goes to Happy Place by Emily Henry. Again, this is one of those books that I just did not expect to love as much as I did. It's funny because on release day, I downloaded it onto my Kindle because I was like, oh, I'm not even gonna buy the physical copy. Like, I don't need the physical copy. I'm just gonna download it on my Kindle and read it digitally instead. And then I started reading it and I just started sobbing. There were so many like one-liners in this book that just spoke to my soul and explained things that I have felt and thought in my brain but have never been able to like say out loud. And it just like had them written on paper, and I was just so shocked that these thoughts that I had were experiences that other people felt too. And even though obviously Harriet and Wynne are not real people, the things that they thought and the things that they said were obviously feelings that I have felt, and that was just such a validating but also like crazy experience. The family dynamics of Harriet, the people pleasing of Harriet, the miscommunication because she's just terrified and just like simply can't bring herself to have these conversations with people. I know people were like, this is just miscommunication, whatever. Like, no, it's not just a simple miscommunication. It's like she physically couldn't have these conversations because of the thought being so terrifying of what could happen after these conversations occurred. And I felt that so deeply in my soul as someone who is not the best at standing up for myself, as someone who's not great at dealing with confrontation and having these discussions that often like need to be had, but it's not as simple as like, oh, I don't want to have that conversation. Like, it's uncomfortable. Like, it goes so much deeper than that. I feel like I've never had that explained and portrayed so well as it was in Happy Place. I feel like I will never be able to explain the attachment that I have to this book in a way that accurately represents how I feel. I would be shocked if Emily Henry can ever write a book that tops this one for me. Obviously never say never, but I really enjoy all of her books, and this was easily my favorite. I know not everyone has the same experience I did. I know that because I've seen so many people be like, yeah, that was such a fun little rom-com, and I'm like, you mean it didn't rip your whole heart out and like tore it into tiny little millions of shreds? Cool. Not the same reading experience. Obviously different books just connect with different people. That's just how books work, which is kind of special. And that brings us to our last book and our top spot on my favorite books of 2023. And if you haven't guessed what this book is, I would be quite utterly shocked, honestly. But my favorite book of 2023 is Daisy Hates The Great Undoing by Jessa Hastings. I read this in February, I think, and I was about to say it changed my life. I don't want to be dramatic, but I think it changed my life. I think it's just like the way Jessa writes quotes and characters and dynamics between those characters is insane to me. The way they talk and behave, like, yes, definitely, like, don't get me wrong, I can recognize that there are definitely very unhealthy relationships and behaviors in this book and in this series as a whole, but it's a fiction book. Like, let me enjoy this as a fiction book. I would not want to actually experience what these characters experience and go through the things that they go through and have a relationship like they do. I don't want that in real life. But as a fiction book, objectively from an outside, you know, like reading my little book in my comfy chair, you know, like, let me just love it and adore it in peace. I'm not saying people should have toxic relationships. I'm just saying I might love a bit of toxicity in my books, okay? There is something about this series where the way that Jessa Hastings writes just somehow connects with me and my heart and my brain and my soul in a way that no other books do. And I don't even need to explain myself, because if you guys don't love it, that's so fine. It doesn't matter. Like, everyone has those books that you just connect with on a soul level, and this series just does that for me. And some of you might be like, oh, is this your favorite book in the series? No, I don't know what my favorite book in the series is. This is the only one that I read this year though, so I obviously couldn't include any of the others in this video. But yeah, top spot has to go to The Great Undoing. And I like knew it. As soon as I read that book, I was like, surely there's not going to be another book that tops this year. And I was correct. Prepare to be sick of me when Into the Dark comes out next year. Prepare to be sick of me. Anyway, those are all my favorite books from 2023. I think this is also my last video of the year. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this. I hope you found some new recommendations, and I also hope you all have the best rest of 2023, and I guess I will see you guys next year. I love you all so much. Thank you for the best year ever. I appreciate you all more than you know, but I will see you guys somewhere else on the internet. Goodbye.